All right, great. So we're going to talk about, now we've done our pest analysis, we've talked about what scenario building is. We're moving from the generate variable stage to the select variable stage. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so whenever you want to make kind of a graph or a chart, what do you need? You need an x and a y axis, right? Now what do we put on our x and y axis? Well, we put impact on our y. And uncertainty on our x. Now, I'm just giving a kind of a generic discussion. So we're going to have a little f here, a little f here, big F here. Okay. Or you could use any letter, A, B, C, D, whatever. It doesn't matter. Okay. I use an F for factor. But anyhow, now when you actually do this yourself, you need to think very hard about what scale to use. Okay, so let me tell you some pitfalls. Okay, if you put a scale of 1 to 10, make sure you can explain why you chose a 2 versus a 4.5. Okay, make sure you have some sort of a rubric. You may not need to show it on the actual graph that you illustrated, but you need to have it in your head because you might get asked. Some people also like to use color. I've also seen, you know, like red to green with yellow in the middle, for example. You know, they call that amber, but you know, why is it amber versus dark yellow versus highlighter neon yellow? And you know, what about dark red and light green and all this crazy stuff? And you get asked on that, people put you on the spot to watch you stumble. Okay, so make sure that you have some sort of a reason for choosing what scale, what color, or what degree that you've selected. That's very, very important. Okay. So, I'd like to add also that you can also put impact here. You know, you can switch these, or you can. Some people say instead of uncertainty, they'll say certainty. Whatever. Okay. As long as you've specified it, you're good to go. Just remember, if you start messing with the axes, your variables will cluster in different places. Okay. So let's start off, and we'll populate our chart. So we're going to pretend that these are variables that I have selected from either an analysis of the dynamic environment or my pest. It doesn't really matter, okay? Kind of messed up that V there. So we got a whole slew of variables up here, okay? Now what I would recommend that you do is either on a separate sheet or possibly at the bottom of your graph, depending on how much room you have. You could say like V1 is, you know, rising population or something. Okay, or you can also just put the variables in there like rising population or whatever variables you decide to use. Okay, it's more of a style thing. So first we have to look at our key variables. Okay, key variables. Key variables are going to be like V1 and V2. So you choose these. Okay? V1 and V2. These are things that are very germane, are very relevant, very pertinent to what we're doing. And they're very certain. Okay? Things that are typical key variables. People get old. People die. These are things that when you say, that's a key variable, most people say, well, yeah, that's pretty obvious, right? I agree with that. most common sense thinking people would not disagree with you if you said that something was certain and relevant. Okay, these are things that are pretty obvious. Okay. Then you also have pivot variables. So we got key here. And pivot down here. Okay? So pivot variables are basically those variables that say, well, that's really important if that happens, but I don't know if it actually will happen. Things like, what's the government going to do? What are the customers going to think? What are our suppliers going to do? What's the competition going to do? Are there some deep historical forces that may come about? What about the market stuff that I don't really know what's going on and I can't control? What about that stuff? Okay, we don't know. There's a lot of stuff we don't know, but my goodness, if it happens, we need to pay attention. Those are your pivot variables. Okay. So let me summarize this again. A key variable is high impact, low uncertainty. We know it's important. We know it's going to happen. Pivot variables are high uncertainty. We don't know if that's going to happen. And high impact. But if it does happen, we better pay attention. Okay? That's how you plot the variables themselves, okay? Now, the next question that you probably get asked is, well, why do we actually care about that? Why is that relevant? Why do we need to do that? Well, first of all, we take these key and pivot variables and we combine them into the scenarios themselves. And I just dropped my pen. Looks like. Pick that up. Okay. So we'll start off. Table out there. You can see me. It looks like you can. Okay. Let me the bottom of my sheet here. So we'll start off and we'll say, well, let's look at variable 1. Let's say we're looking at a pharmaceutical firm, and we're looking at a pharmaceutical firm that operates in Europe. What might be something that would be very obvious and very germane to drug safety regulations in Europe? Well, I would argue that V1 is very important. Okay, we're gonna we'll say age. Okay, we know that V1 is very obvious. Okay. Variable 1, very obvious and very relevant to the pharmaceutical industry. People are getting older and they're living longer. We have a population that has more old people. Okay? So now that we know that, what we don't know would be something like, how about V10 and V13? Okay? What about drug safety regulations in Europe? So we'll add that in there. Okay? Well, on that front, we don't know a lot, right? We could say V10 alpha. Let's see. I'm trying to think about the best way to show that. Hoping you can see that. So V10 alpha, we could say that there'd be no change. I usually put a dash here to mean that things will stay the same. You can say V10 Bravo, that drug safety regulations will increase, or V10 Charlie. Okay, drug safety regulations in Europe will decrease. Okay, you could have also put an upwards arrow here. It doesn't matter. The point is that typically for every pivot variable you have 3 possibilities. It's not going to change. It's going to get more. It's going to get less. Bam. Okay. So then you want to take and add something. Well, pharmaceutical companies would probably care about a major pandemic, a major disease outbreak in the next 20 years. And what do we think about a major pandemic in the next 20 years? Well, we would say that there would be, oh, I forgot to specify, that's V13. We could have V13 alpha. There won't be one. V13 Bravo, there'll be a big major disease outbreak. And V13 Charlie, that's confusing. V13 Charlie, there won't be a major disease outbreak. It'll be a small disease outbreak. Okay? So then what you want to do is you want to make some choices. Okay? This is where you get paid, the big bucks. Okay? You make some choices. You say, well, you know what? Based on current trends of drug safety regulations, I believe that there will be increasing requirements. Let's get I believe that there will be increasing drug safety regulations, and because I know that every 20 years or so there will be a major pandemic, and we're about due, so I think there's going to be a major pandemic in the next 20 years. Okay? So I've said people are getting old, drug safety regulations are going to increase, and there's going to be a major disease outbreak in the next 20 years. So, what I wind up saying is I kind of have this pseudo-mathematical equation here. I say that V1, right, and we don't really analyze that, well, how much old are they going to get? You could do that, but it's not necessary. V1 plus V10 Bravo plus V13 Bravo equals, and this is where you have like a little bit of a narrative. I won't write it because I'm afraid you all won't see it out there, but you want to give some sort of a little text. So my text might read, well, as you know, the population continues to get older on average. This aging population has been accompanied by increasing. We believe that the current trend. Sorry, it's not as easy as it sounds. Okay, population is continuing to get older. Accompanying this aging population, we believe that drug regulations will continue to increase as they have over the past 20 years. Furthermore, every 20 years we have a major pandemic. Because we get one, so that's the way I've said. So people are getting older, regulations are increasing, and there will be a major drug pandemic or outbreak. Okay, so that's your mini scenario. That's your scenario itself. Now, what I want you guys to do on your written assignments is you're going to do 3 of these. Okay, you give me 3 scenarios. Okay, and then what you do is you say, well, I picked this one, scenario 1, as the most likely, because management, in particular strategy, is all about the ability to make choices. Okay, you need to be making choices. It's important. Resources and time is limited, so at some point you have to be able to tell your boss, you make this choice, not this one. Focus the limited resources that you have on this scenario 1 and not scenarios 2 or 3. We think scenario 1 is more urgent and something that you need to be seriously worried about. Okay? So let's talk a little bit more about the do's and don'ts on scenario building. Okay? So we've talked about combining the scenarios, we generated the many scenarios, we combine the scenarios, we're by some scenarios. So we've done all the steps. So let's talk about the do's and don'ts. Historically, my students do not add a narrative in here. They don't do it. And they leave it to me to have the imagination to figure out what they're trying to say. Which, as a professor, I'm willing to kind of work with you on that. But you have to remember, if you're trying to pitch a product or a recommendation to your boss in a meeting, you don't want that person to connect the dots for you. Because if they do, they may have an interpretation that you may not like or may not represent you in the best possible light. Okay? I also get asked, well, what about these other variables? Why do we even bother putting these others if they're not key or pivot variables? Well, imagine that you're in a meeting and the boss says, well, you forgot this thing. You forgot this variable. You forgot about this fact. You can say, no. That's variable 19 right here. We don't think it's a key or pivot, and here's why. So now you've been thoughtful, you've made an assessment, you've made a decision. Your opinion may be a little bit different, okay? But you've at least thought through it. And then the boss, of course, may tell you, well, no, that needs to be a key variable, and you say, oh, okay, and then you move it in there and you do what they want. But it makes it look like you made a different choice than they made, not that you were sloppy or forgetful. That's important, okay? I also get asked, well, you know, what's the number? Why is 3? Well, if you actually do this as a profession, you'll have scenario building exercises that may look like econometric equations. I've seen that. You may have scenarios that'll be whole books that are comprised of hundreds of variables. Okay. For this exercise, you only need to have 3. Okay. I'm just introducing you to it. Scenario building is something we could have a whole class on. So we're just introducing you to it right now. What I want you to think about, though, is that your scenarios need to be grounded in reality and kind of a blend with fantasy. Okay? So if you had scenarios that were only key variables, what would you have? To use an example from TV, what would you have? You would have something like Seinfeld or the Golden Girls, something that is so mundane and so ordinary it's not even worth telling your boss. Let's say, well, duh, why did I pay you? What are you doing here telling me this? I already know that. That's not useful. Now, if you were to take something like a scenario made only of pivot variables, you'd have something like, oh, the Lord of the Rings. Something that is so fantastic and so strange that it wouldn't even be remotely believable. Okay? So what you want to do, again, don't be just the historian telling me the things that we already know, and don't be the purely fantasy writer. What you need to do, you think about it, it's like being a historical fiction writer. You ground in facts your fantasies or dreams. That's what makes these things believable. That's what makes these things useful. You know some things, you speculate on what you don't know, and that's how you compose your scenarios. We will do an exercise in groups on scenario building in class. So of course, any questions, you're welcome to email me, come to office hours, put comments below, or just ask them in class. Okay? Well, I hope you've enjoyed this lecture. I hope you found it informative. My name is Duncan Pelly, and I will see you next time. Thank you.